Hello, and welcome to the Fintech Times Podcast, focused on discussing the latest fintech topics and trends from around the world. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report all the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world.
We are here today to discuss one very interesting subsector of ethical banking, which is greenwashing. Now, during the entire month of July, the Fintech Times has dedicated itself to understanding and documenting every aspect of ethical banking that's currently taking place in the industry today. However, with greenwashing, it's a very interesting term, with sustainability being the topic on everybody's mind, even in the fintech world. Many companies are looking at how they can be more green. It's no longer something that's just nice to have. Consideration for environmental impact has become an essential impact of operations. However, sometimes there can be a bigger focus on the marketing rather than actually making a sustainable difference. So enter greenwashing. I'm here today with an expert panelist, and together we're going to be discussing how you can spot greenwashing, how you can avoid it, and as well as looking at how fintechs can promote ESG without actually falling victim. So I mentioned my lovely panelist. It's Monika. How are you today, Monika?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for having me. It's going to be an interesting discussion.
I really think it's going to be very, very topical as well. I think it's going to be really interesting to sort of gauge an understanding on that. But before we get into that, why don't you give our listeners and our readers around the world a little bit of an introduction about who you are and the company that you've come from, please?
Yes, so I'm Monika Liikamaa, born in Sweden, but to Finnish parents. So been living in Finland now for 20 plus years. I used to be a developer in the last millennium and then been in the telco industry, and then the last 15 years building banks and financial institutions, and founded Enfuce around 6 years ago with my co-founders. And we will building a company that enables the issuance of money. So we help issue cards or like actually accounts and payment methods, but then many talk about cards. And we also then incorporated My Carbon Action, where we actually enable the calculation of CO2 emissions. You know, I am a mother of four. I really wanted to build a company I can be proud of and that has positive impact to the world. So as Enfuce already, we are currently located in multiple countries in Europe. We enable around 13 million end customers daily payments, both in Europe and in the Middle East. And we really heavily into ESG, core value sustainability, and it means so much more than just fighting the climate crisis. But that's how we have been really focusing. So through our core business of enabling payments enable consumption derives emissions, and emissions is really a big problem, not for the world as such, but for humankind. So I always say that the biggest problem with climate crisis, it's not that the planet won't survive, but we as a humankind won't going forward. So that means that we really need to step it up, stop talking, and start doing stuff.
You're absolutely right. There has become an unmistakable sense of urgency, and especially so within the fintech industry. And we mentioned a little bit in our opening that it no longer becomes something that was just nice to have. It was a dire necessity. And I think from when we look at the fintech industry as a whole, we really are starting to see customers become more conscious in this space. And they're starting to turn away from companies that aren't environmentally friendly or don't actively make steps to be more environmentally friendly. And that sort of comes back to that sort of customer business relationship. It sort of comes back to what we're going to be discussing in this webinar today. And so greenwashing, I'd love to know from your perspective what you would define greenwashing to be.
Well, I would say that greenwashing is the communication and marketing practice targeted to screw us over, meaning that trying to sell products and services to people who actually care about the future of the planet in a way that you're making them think, making us believe that somehow what you're doing and what you're selling is good, or at least it's less harmful than the competitive product or service. So I think that's like the not so short description of what I believe and what we believe that greenwashing is.
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head with your approach, you know, and in a time when we're trying to cool the planet down, you know, all these companies are sort of just releasing hot air, really. It's becoming, I think, a more prevalent issue, especially from somebody that is exposed to so much marketing material. It's definitely become more of a selling term than it has actually a functional operational term. I was just wondering, so we've got the definition, if we look at how it practically translates into the fintech industry, where do you see it happening in finance the most?
Well, it happens everywhere, any kind of products, whether it be mobility as a service or whether it be investing or insurances. Like, you're trying to promote your own goods and services by highlighting how green they are. It's a little bit what we have with, you know, Diet Coke and these type of things, like trying to say that, you know, it's less sugar, so it's better for you, and etc. And not really saying that it's not that good to, you know, drink carbohydrated stuff, it's bad for the teeth, etc. So trying to just find something that is good to highlight in a way that you either try to downplay all the bad things that it has, or that, for example, you're trying to just highlight one good thing and then you have a lot of bad things. So the only aim is to sell more products. So we know that Coca-Cola, for example, is one of the biggest polluters of plastic, and because it's cheap and it's easy to produce, etc. So I think it's not that we should drink less Coke maybe, but it's really about, when you produce stuff, take care of the whole chain of your product and service. And I think that's where we as consumers, whether it be corporates or end customers, we need to understand what we are buying, demand stuff. And I remember like 20 years ago when fair trade products started to surface. And then it was like, it's the hippies, who buy those things. But when it starts becoming like you understand the value of it and why you should do it, then it can be implemented. I think that's also the thing, that we people are herd animals. So both for good and bad, we will tend to do what others do. So the better we understand, and that's also why greenwashing is now so big, because of the herd behavior, that if someone gets through with their greenwashing initiative. But I think the way to also tackle that is that have in those communities and discussion groups and the web information that are reliable, then you can also fight the greenwashing, because I think that's still in the end it's in all our interest.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned with the sort of herd mentality, it's sort of, the herd mentality has an awful byproduct of giving the wrong companies integrity that they don't really deserve.
Yes.
So you mentioned a little bit just there about sort of it's how it comes to be involved with consumers, the end consumers and corporate consumers as well.
Yep.
And I think that as people who work at the forefront of the industry, it can be quite easy for us to spot, because we've seen so much of it, But how can the everyday consumers spot greenwashing? What are the telltale signs, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think in short, it's the lack of transparency. So if I just take an example of something that you would, a service that you would buy from the internet or something, and you don't see any information about how it's produced, where it's run, etc. I think that's a sign. So, and I don't think that many do it on purpose, but I do think that companies need to step it up and understand that in order to fight greenwashing, we need to be transparent. So, like, for example, what we did as Enfuce is that we went and became a partner of the Climate Pledge. There are a lot of communities or stuff that you can be part of, but it's just to make sure that people understand that there is a third party who is making sure that we are not BSing around, that the transparency numbers, we need to report it, because what we're still seeing is that there is still a lack of what is, the ESG reporting, what is sustainable, that it's still in the makings. So there are not really crystal clear definitions of what's good or bad. And when that is the fact, I think it's more in the end of the day that we do more good than bad. And then it's transparency is actually the only way to fight it. And if you spot something, you either ask to understand more, so like, just this is the product or service, so how do you actually produce and how do you take care of your people, etc. And if you don't get that information, then it's a red flag. But I think we're still in the early days where the community of many people asking questions, and if a company or product deliverer don't answer it, then it's definitely a red flag. But it requires a bit more these days still, because but remembering also one thing, that it's in the end of the day, it's the 10% of the richest countries that emit over 50% of the emissions. So really understanding that before this becomes a really big, massive problem, we need to find a way to make it fair. So really having the fairness in consumption. And what I mean then, it's about, if you look at in Europe, we are pretty much the same level as the country is, meaning that what's the minimum wages. Yes, there are a lot of different, but like if you compare them to a very poor country, and in order for people to feel safe and prosper, the richest of us need to emit less. It doesn't mean that we need to go down in the way we live. We just need to find the products and services that emits less, and then we need to accept that the under-consuming countries, they need to be able to emit more, which means that I think one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing still is that people really, really think that technology will come and solve it. Like, I can still, behave badly and buy excessive amount of stuff. But because if we just look at the food waste also, each of us in the richest countries are actually having it's like almost 100 kilograms a year, and that's like waste. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do, but really understanding that fighting the survival of humankind, it requires whole humankind, so all people everywhere to start doing stuff. But it also means that the ones that are the privileged enough, meaning us, we need to act even faster.
You've identified a really core element of greenwashing in the fact that there's almost like a monopoly in the biggest companies and their impact that they're having on the world. I think it was an opinion report that came out in April of this year that what they did when they did their report is they surveyed 1,000 SMEs in the United States, and I think this isn't in verbatim, but I think it was about between 52 and 55% didn't understand the jargon, what they described as environmental jargon. They didn't understand net zero, they didn't understand green and clean. And it does make sense because it's sort of lost its meaning.
Yes.
What is the meaning of greenwashed words. You know, they've been watered down in a sense. You referenced what these actions of the biggest companies are causing, and a bit about how they're the most responsible. Can you think of any industry examples of where greenwashing has occurred?
Yeah, I think the car industry, definitely. I mean, like, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but Volkswagen, I mean, like, that's probably, I would even call it fraud, when they, a couple of years ago, said that the cars were emitting less, but they had actually rigged the cars. So there was this type of things. And then we have, of course, the air industry, airliners, etc. But a lot of, I would say that in every industry there is. I know that these very big, fast fashion brands try to come up with these really sustainable brands, etc. But if you really think about, like, you're buying a sustainably, whatever that means, produced cotton t-shirt, just understanding how much water goes in to cotton, and understanding that, especially now with the climate crisis ongoing, that, you know, just the problem of getting fresh water to people is a big problem. So I think those are really the things to understand, that it's not about the product itself where you are buying it, but it's about the whole chain of it becoming produced, etc. And that's why I always say that living a more sustainable life, and this is especially for banking, I'm saying it's not about spending less money, but it's about buying the right stuff. So buying smaller houses, or houses that are heated with geothermal heating instead of direct electricity. And like this, I think it was like in India, that if it's less emitting to actually drive a petrol fuel car in India than to have an electric car, because the electricity is produced through coal, which emits even more. So I think it's understanding the big picture, but then doing the changes in your everyday life, whether you are a person or a company. And you know, companies are people in the end. And if we look at from an individual segment, it's like 5 things that emit. It's what we eat, how we live, how we transport ourselves from A to B, the goods we buy, and then, you know, the services we procure. So in these 5 domains, there are a lot of low-hanging fruits and to like really change on. And just as an example, an average Finn emits around 9.7 tons of emissions a year. And then it's like, okay, is that a lot or not? Well, in order for us to keep to the 1.5 degree lifestyle, we should be down at 2.5 tons by 2030. And by 2050, we should be at 1 ton. So it's over 90% change in how we as individuals emit. And if you think about it like that, it's like, oh, that's a lot of things I need to change. And that's why, again, I see this as a huge opportunity for fintechs, for companies in general who are serious about changing the game. There is this huge potential of change needing to occur. Find solutions that will keep the lifestyle, will enhance it for the many, and yet emit less. And you will be a winner in 10, 15 years. I mean, like, seriously winner. And then a caution to the ones not doing, you will die because you can't survive, because it's not in the best interest of humankind.
No, you're absolutely right, and you've painted a very disturbing picture of how widespread this issue is. You know, it's not just in the finance industry or in fintechs, it's everywhere, and it's everybody's jumping on the bandwagon in a way, which is really it's very concerning, and our listeners should be very, very concerned about this trend that's really taking place.
And however, and I'm the Finn here, so we are the happiest nation in the world, but we're not known for being overly cheerful. But I have faith in us as people, and especially looking at the younger generation. So looking at my kids, my oldest, she's 22, and the youngest is 12. I mean, like, that's where the change makers are coming. So what we, and I mean me, the older ones, need to do is to fuck up less so that you can come and save the world, because that's unfortunately what you need to do, and that's fortunately what you will do. I have faith in you.
Pardon?
I have faith in you, the younger generation, so please.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a very pressing topic among the younger demographics and the younger audience. We're really seeing how their actions and their opinions on the environment are really driving change. So there is hope out there, as you say, there definitely is. My final question for you, Monika, and one thing that we must discuss, it's probably a bit hopeful. It's probably a bit of an optimistic question, but how do you think that we can eradicate greenwashing once and for all? How can we bring it to an end? No more greenwashing. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's really about making the ones that are doing it visible. So also the funny thing about corporates that are built up of people is that shaming works, because you should be ashamed of yourself if you're doing it. So voicing that out. And I know, for example, there are countries like Sweden that has this greenwashing prize. So they are issuing. So I think maybe you guys should put that kind of, nobody wants to win that prize. Or nobody wants to be on the top 10 or on that prize. But I think that should be one, because nobody wants to get there. And the only way not to get on that kind of list is to be transparent at what you're doing and how it's changing. So I think that one thing that we are also a lot scared of as companies, that we are scared of being outed. But I think what we should be open and honest, because the Twitter effect, someone says something and always hundreds of thousands of people get upset, but it's about making sure that it's okay to become better. You don't have to be the best from day one, but you need to understand what you're doing wrong, and there has to be an urgent want to change, and then you will transparently report how you are changing. And I think like Patagonia, an extraordinary, awesome example of a company who really walks the talk. I mean, doesn't hide stuff, when something is bad, talks about it and then changes and then presents that. So I really think that you should put up this, the shit list award of the greenwashing, and then make sure that nobody of us want to be there. And I think that's one way at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Naming and shaming, it causes such reputational damage at least, and then as you mentioned, that's be enough to close down your business.
Yes. I mean, let's do what Me Too movement did for women's rights. Let's do that for greenwashing. Again, it's to out the ones that aren't doing it, but then also guiding how it should be done. Because I think that's the one thing that many are a bit afraid of, and I can see banks really, being afraid. They want to help their end customers and corporates to lead a more sustainable life, because they need to invest in companies and products that are more sustainable. Yet everyone is so scared of materializing it in numbers, because it has to be so to the point right, and they are afraid of otherwise it will be outed. But what we did with one big bank is that we actually implemented the calculation of emissions. So when you pay what you bought, etc., we did a calculation, and then we realized ourselves also, and the feedback from the end user is that it actually helped them realize where they spend and what the consequence of that is. It's not about is the vegan spaghetti 1 kilograms of emissions or is it 0.6. It's just that understanding that going for a vegan diet, if I'm a meat lover, maybe a week will take down my total yearly emissions with 10%. Okay, and then it's like 80% left. Changing from fossil fuel car to electric car in the country and having green energy it will take down 2 tons again. So it's about understanding how to change. So that's as simple, but giving concrete actionable items. And that's why I think it's, again, being part of this, I don't know, maybe we're now coming up with the greenwashing, anti-greenwashing award, but having, and that's why we went into the climate pledge also, that we actually get tips and insights on other companies also committed to net zero, in a way that we actually in the community share tips and tricks on how to reduce emissions, not tips and tricks on how to, trick the audience, but really on how to actually do it. And I think that's what we need to be more transparent in those efforts.
Yes, exactly, and that's why Enfuce is doing what it's doing to hold these people to accountable and to bring a wider sense of transparency and an understanding to the industry. It's a very pressing topic on ethical banking, and a very core topic to ethical banking as well. So I think it's been a really insightful conversation. Thank you very much. That's Monika Liikamaa, the co-CEO of Enfuce. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and anybody else who would like to participate in our ethical banking series, please get in touch with the Fintech Times. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Monika.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Fintech Times podcast. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Don't forget to check us out at thefintechtimes.com and subscribe to our monthly publication to keep up to date with all the latest fintech news.